Hello, welcome. It's episode 126 of Grow Yourself Up. And I feel like I want to say, can you believe that every time? Because I'm always struck, wow, you really stuck with this project a long time. That's my own internal messaging to myself, I guess. So welcome. Thank you for being here with episode 126. And today I've got a guest who I'm going to tell you a bit about, and then I'll tell you a bit about what we talked about. So my guest today is Flora Cruft. So let me tell you a bit about Flora. So Flora Cruft is a poet, a picture book writer, an existential psychotherapist, and a creativity coach. She runs her own online therapy and coaching practice, Southwest Therapy. Her debut book, I Am a Spider Mother, was published by the Mum Poem Press in 2022. Flora won the Books That Help 2023 Picture Book Mentorship with Little Tiger Press, and she loves to write, sing, bake, and enjoy loud kitchen discos with her twin daughters. Flora has an Instagram account, Poet Therapist Baker, where she explores the intersections between therapy, creativity, writing, authentic living, baking, and mental health. She lives with her partner and family in East Devon. And all these details will be in the show notes, and you can connect with Flora by Instagram. So this was a really wonderful conversation because I love a lot of what Flora does. She really democratizes creativity. So there's often this idea that that creativity is only for certain people, or only some people are good at art, or only some people are good at music or singing or whatever. And I remember years ago, one of my sisters started to take singing lessons, and I was like, oh, is she allowed to do that? Is she even a good singer? And I really had to roll that back for myself and think, oh, well, actually, you probably get to being a good singer by taking lessons. And I thought I was a rubbish singer because I didn't get chosen for the choir in my junior school. And then I realized that actually probably I could have some singing lessons and my tone may improve. Anyway, that's an aside. But Flora really highlights, and she highlights this in her work, but she also shares in some lovely detail about how to talk back to your inner critic and how creativity is really for everyone. And it's really important actually in the kind of the context that we're existing in now, and this crazy world we live in where we're all looking at our phones constantly, or buying something, or trying to search for the next dopamine hit. And creativity is really a way to mitigate against that, because when you create something, you actually also get dopamine, but it's much more, it's not as immediate as picking up your phone. And it's much more satisfying, and it actually takes your attention, and it gives you something. It's nourishing. So I consider reading creative. I love this podcast actually because that's also creative for me. And I can get to create, and I get to talk, and I love sharing ideas, and I hope that it helps you. And there's so many ways that we can be creative, and also it is accessible to everyone. It's not there's not some special group of people who get to be creative. We all get to be creative. One of the things that can be super frustrating about early motherhood is that it feels like there's no space for that sort of thing. But I want to urge you, if you're in a frustrating period of your parenting, to try and make space for some creativity for you. That may be jotting down a few thoughts in your diary. Forget about some sort of journaling practice. You may not have time for that. You may literally be able to write 3 sentences on a page a day diary. You may be able to create yourself a beautiful coffee each day with a fancy milk thing that makes a pretty pattern or something. That could be delightful joy. Really simple creative things. You might be able to make different types of soup. I went through a stage of liking to make different color soups, and I made myself beautiful. I made different orange soups, green soups, all different green vegetables, and then a soup which had all different creamy vegetables like parsnips, celeriac, onions, all these things, and it was delicious. And I take great joy in color, so I loved experimenting with all the different ways of color. And when I'm talking about cooking soup, this is a very simple thing. All I do is cut up onions, saute them in olive oil, chuck all the vegetables in, put vegetable stock in, and then I blend it. This is not I'm not a chef or anything like that. And so I really want you to kind of start thinking about accessibility in terms of using your creativity. I still like getting dressed, but it was much more fun before I had children because I would like going a lot more places and I could fit into my whole wardrobe. I love putting together colors. I love like earrings and necklaces and all of that sort of stuff. Like getting dressed for me is creative. I love scarves. I'm wearing a scarf today. That's creative. So think about like writing, reading, singing, painting, drawing with a pencil, doing anything like that. Anything you do in the cooking, in the kitchen, I think is creative. Playing with your children is creative, like if you're sitting on the floor and you're playing magnet tiles. Magnet tiles is something that I enjoy playing, actually. I'm not a Lego fan, but magnet tiles I can manage. And that's fun to see what I can create and to kind of let go of any expectations, just to see what happens. And the reason I'm banging on so much about creativity is because we know it is one of the ways that we really complete stress cycles. And parenting is a really, really stressful time, and many of us get absolutely battered by the experience of it. And we need resources, and creativity is a beautiful resource. Your own creativity, like your creativity is valuable. Let yourself explore it. And I'm really excited to share this episode with you from Flora about how she does singing, and how she's really cultivated her writing, how she publishes her poetry, how she's now writing children's books. I think it's going to be really inspiring for you. Um, and I hope that you can find something that nourishes you in amidst the chaos, because I know that life is like a chaotic drama sometimes. And I'm just sending you so much love. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, Flora. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. I'm so delighted to have you.
Hello, Cath. It's really lovely to talk to you.
Really nice to be here with you today. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your path to motherhood?
Okay. Well, I think first thing to say is that it was quite a long and torturous path to get to motherhood. It was about a little bit over 5 years of trying and unexplained infertility and IUIs and IVF. So there was a lot of sadness, there was a lot of longing and repeated disappointments to get to motherhood. And I have never lost that feeling of being incredibly lucky to have finally had my lovely twin daughters, Rosalind and Leonie, because there was a time when it really didn't look like it was going to happen for us in the conventional way.
Yeah. Wow, I can hear so much, because 5 years, I mean, that's a long, long, long time. That's a long time to watch other people getting pregnant, hearing pregnancy announcements, birth announcements, like toddler birthday parties. That's just so much to hold. Wow.
Yeah, it was really hard, and I have so much empathy for anyone who is going through that journey, either trying to conceive for the first time or trying to conceive and struggling with secondary infertility. It is an extraordinarily challenging life experience. Yeah.
It's incredibly, that thing about, I mean, I wish it wasn't so, but we are so valued for our biology. And when that seems to be failing us, there's so much we then seem to make up about ourselves because of that. How did you kind of manage that?
That's a really good question. I think, having had many years of therapy myself, and because I'm a therapist, as part of my training and for personal reasons, I had years of therapy in my 20s and my 30s. I think that by the time I was really struggling with infertility, I had developed quite a solid, kind inner voice towards myself. So I noticed the feelings and the sense of, shame, for example, or frustration, feeling like, why am I not managing this? But I worked very consciously to counteract it with the kinder inner voice that said, this is not your fault. In fact, this is really out of your control in many respects. And all you can really do is choose how you treat yourself now and choose to treat yourself kindly. And I think that, in a way, was in brilliant practice for then becoming a mother and experiencing all the challenges, physical and psychological, of that transformation. It was like I got to sort of practice a little bit in advance some of what I was going to then subsequently need as a mother. And I remember things like, I mean, I don't know what your experience was, but certainly having IVF, for example, I found there's a strong sense of kind of having to give your body over to other people, of having to really kind of trust these other people, these professionals, to do, in a sense, what they think is best with it.
Yeah.
And that can be very triggering for some people if they've, for example, experienced any kind of sexual abuse or assault. And also, at the same time, it was a really useful practice, a way of kind of having to let go on quite a holistic level, to kind of let go and allow things to happen.
Yeah.
And kind of foster that patience. So I did a lot of mindfulness actually in that time. I remember that was one of the key things for me, was to do a lot of mindfulness and positive visualization, and deep breathing.
Yeah, and I think what you say about, especially in this audience of the podcast, sexual abuse and assault and rape are unfortunately really quite common.
Yeah.
As childhood and young adult experiences. And I don't think that that's necessarily talked about enough in terms of what a shadow that can bring to motherhood, and all the kind of just the physical stuff around being prodded, and even kind of the experience of having to open your legs for an examination. It's very, there has the potential to be so much traumatization, in that.
Absolutely.
And I kind of, yeah, I wish I think we've made a long way. We've made a lot of improvement in terms of trauma-informed care, but we nowhere near where we need to be from that angle, in my kind of opinion. And Flora, tell us about what you said about, you made this comment about that you really had to practice letting go and speaking kindly to yourself, and not being in control, which was good practice for motherhood. What was your, once you had got pregnant and you had your beautiful twin girls, how was early postpartum and your motherhood, your early mothering experience?
Wow, it was a whirlwind. It was a total twin whirlwind, which I'm sure you may be able to relate to, Cath, with your own. Yeah, it was, I think, having spent so long and in so many ways kind of built up to the experience of having the babies, there was, for me, a great joy at actually finally having two healthy babies. And it was quite scary as well. It felt scary partly because they were born a little bit premature, and that was partly because I had preeclampsia. So I got quite ill on the day of their birth, and then for I think about 24 hours afterwards, it was really my blood pressure went up a lot, and I was being very carefully monitored. So
Wow, that's so scary. I mean, that's
yeah, it
again
was
is like,
scary. It was kind of moving from preeclampsia to a more eclamptic state, which is the really dangerous one. So that was frightening. And again, there was this need to kind of trust in others, really,
yeah,
which isn't always easy. But I kind of again made a conscious choice to do, because I had a cesarean, which had always been planned, which was great. And so I got to see the babies literally for about a minute or two before they were wheeled away to the I think, what was it called again? Low intensity unit. And my partner went with them. But then I became more ill, so I couldn't see them until the next day. And I remember just really very strongly having this sense of, well, I've got to keep alive for them. I've got to get through tonight, where I was being monitored by a nurse throughout the night. And then the joy and the relief at finding that I got better and that they were pretty healthy and well, despite being miniature. And yeah, this enormous sense, I think, after the first day or two, of kind of awe at really what my body could do, at how it could carry these beings and birth them, but then also recover from this experience of being ill, or at frankly the NHS, that what they can do. First, I would never, if you think about it, I would never have got pregnant in the first place without medical science, and then I probably would have died giving birth to the babies without medical science. So there was an extraordinary kind of wonder at, wow, look at this. This is something.
and gratitude, I imagine, like a lot of kind of,
Yes,
wow.
enormous gratitude. Yeah.
And it's kind of so, I mean, having that experience of birth so close to potential death is so profound and kind of shattering in many ways.
Yes. Yeah, a bit like a rebirth, that real sense of matrescence as a sort of an opening up of new life, in a way, a new way of being.
Yeah. Yeah, really, that you kind of had such like a baptism of fire in many ways.
Yeah.
And how did you, how did you support yourself in those early days? Did you have family who helped you? How did you, was your partner off work? How did you, because I know what I experienced the twin thing as very overwhelming, that there were these two. Ours were also miniature people.
Yes.
And motherhood wasn't anything like I thought it would be. Was it what you thought it would be?
I think in many ways it was what I thought it would be. I think that I had seen a lot of my friends already go through motherhood. And so I didn't have any kind of rose-tinted glasses about it. I knew it would be really hard. Also, I'd seen my older brother and his partner have twins about 5 years earlier. And I remember at the time thinking, oh my God, I hope I only get one at a time. And well, actually, by the time of being pregnant with twins, I felt like I'd won the lottery. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So I think I knew it was going to be incredibly grueling, and it was incredibly grueling. And I was very lucky that I had my partner who took some time. He took some time off work, and I had a lot of involvement and help from my parents. So there
that's wonderful.
was a sense, especially in the early days, that I wasn't having to kind of hold this new, exciting but terrifying kind of burden by myself. Having said that, after that initial flurry of sort of change and attention from everybody and everything that we tend to get, don't we? The sort of excitement of the novelty and the
Yeah.
family involvement, perhaps more at the very beginning. Then there was that reality to get used to of the fact that my partner went back to work. My mum was still really supportive and would help me sometimes, but there were a lot of times where I was looking after both the babies entirely on my own, and even just things like the logistics of learning how to feed them, for example, were really challenging and time consuming. I mean, I found that because I had been really ill and I'd been on this particular medication, and the children were premature. Basically, those things all combined to mean that I couldn't breastfeed. And I had very much expected myself to be a breastfeeding mum, kind of able to put one on each boob in a very easy way. And yeah, so there was that disappointment to cope with. And again, another chance to try not to blame myself, really, because I could have, I again knew I could have gone into a spiral of, I should be able to do this, it's my fault. But actually, I thought, what's the point? It's, again, this is out of my control. This is not something that I'm deliberately doing.
Yeah.
So I worked through the sadness of that really by just talking to my partner and my mother and crying as much as I needed to about it. And then there was the challenge of learning how to bottle feed two babies at the same time when neither of them at the beginning really knew how to suck. So
It's so complicated. I mean, listening to you, I am so struck by your wisdom and your kindness, your self-kindness, because it's one thing to talk about self-compassion and about having a kind voice
yeah,
to oneself, but it's another thing to really put it into action. And when you said, I mean, what's the point? And what's the point of beating up on yourself? I beat up on myself still for so many things. And that question about what's the point? Well, there's no point. There's absolutely no point, because it makes your whole experience so much worse. But I have found it such a process to unwind from that. And I also had breastfeeding. I couldn't breastfeed. And I had also thought my sisters both breastfed like champions. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be like that too. My milk is just going to burst out and I'm going to like rugby hold them, that rugby ball hold or something, with
yeah,
lots of people seem to do with twins. And that never happened. And it's such a thing to let go of that fantasy, or to kind of really grieve the fantasy. And what you said about crying and talking about it, because I think those are our best tools, aren't they?
they're our most immediate, accessible tools, I think. If we can communicate a bit of what we're feeling to someone who we know loves us and we love them, and if we can allow the tears, the natural feeling to release out of us, it is so helpful. But I mean, I say that knowing that it's not easy to do that. And I think that I'm very aware of how lucky I was to grow up in a family where emotions were allowed, for example. And so, I've had quite a lot of practice at letting myself talk about my feelings and express them. But even then, though, I think when it comes to feelings around motherhood and the kind of ambivalence and the difficulty of motherhood, it still feels and has felt quite difficult to really voice how hard it is, though.
Yes. Yeah, to kind of really get into the security. And I'm so pleased that like in previous episodes of this, I've been doing a lot about emotional flow and how many of us are trying to teach our children how to kind of really flow with their emotions and to not kind of demonize emotions and to kind of process it and let it out, and how effective crying is. And a lot of us haven't had that in our family of origin. So it's extremely hard to be doing something to grow capacity in ourselves and to try and do it for our children. And I love hearing from people whose families really did allow that, and to hear that you kind of could share with your partner and your mum it was easier. And also still how difficult it was, to really like hold the kind of darkness.
Yeah.
And I have this projection, I guess, of well, I certainly have this because I was an older mother, this idea that it would just all be amazing. And I wonder to what extent your fertility journey, do you think it inhibited your ability to speak of the ambivalence and the darkness because you felt so full of joy and awe and gratitude for the babies?
It could have gone that way. It really could have. And I have met people who have certainly felt like they couldn't complain about the difficulty of parenting, or maybe the regrets about parenting because it took them so long to have babies. I didn't feel that. I think my sense was actually that having had such a long and difficult journey to get to the point of motherhood, I think in a way that was partly during that time of difficulty and infertility was when I really did start practicing that self-kindness in a very conscious way.
Yeah.
So it actually, I think, meant that when I did recognize, wow, this is tough being a parent to two little babies. Wow, these feelings were intense. Wow, I'm more exhausted than I ever have been. Wow, I'm more angry than I ever have been. Wow, I'm generally just feeling more vulnerable than I ever have been. I think it really helped me as a person to have had to kind of find these coping strategies of how to deal with my emotions during the years of infertility. I think it would have been harder actually if I'd got pregnant easily and thought, oh, well, this is the next step. Let's just get on with it.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So in some sense, it really prepared you. The difficulty kind of prepared you for it.
Absolutely. I think so.
And one of the things I've really loved, because we met on Instagram, and one of the things I've really loved is how you've always had a strong expression of creativity. And first of all, when I used to follow you, it was a lot about baking. And you bake beautiful things, like, oh my word, very beautiful things.
Thank you.
And you've moved more into kind of writing and poetry. And tell us about how your own creativity has been a resource for you in motherhood. Like, talk us through how you've kind of allowed yourself that, because often, or maybe you didn't have to give yourself permission, but I think lots of people feel like they somehow need permission from someone else.
That is so true and so sad that I think as a culture we have an assumption that our creativity is only as valid as other people's responses to it.
Yes.
And I think that starts really young. My experience was as a child of just really loving being creative and drawing and making things and singing and dancing and I was lucky that my parents encouraged that. My parents both very creative in their own ways, but actually, interestingly, had perhaps themselves been quite inhibited in their creativity. So there was a sense of as I grew older, and particularly at school, the message was, say, by secondary school time, well, if you're not good at something, then there's no point trying. And that was particularly the case around anything creative. And of course, it depends also on who's saying who's good at something. So
Exactly.
I really loved art. Yeah. I thought I was quite good at art. And then I had an art teacher at secondary school who made it very clear that she didn't think I was good at it. And basically I just stopped creating any art
Oh,
from then
that's
on, from the age
devastating.
of about 15 on. Yeah. And it took
That's
me
just so
another 10
devastating.
years or so really to start drawing at all
Really?
again. Mm.
Wow. And tell me, when you said your parents were perhaps a bit inhibited in their expression, did did that mean that they encouraged you more, or at some point they also did that thing of, oh, if it's not good, then you shouldn't do it?
I think that they were very supportive and they always saw the good. But I think so it wasn't so much a message that they were giving me, but I think that I noticed maybe in my teenage years, I noticed, how to describe this? I noticed a kind of reticence in them to create their own things. I mean, my dad loved writing, for example, and my mum was a wonderful artist, but she didn't think she was. I mean, if you asked her now, she would say she's not, probably, but she's a wonderful artist from the paintings I've seen of hers.
Yeah.
And this is a very silly kind of family story, really, but I remember being told, apparently, my dad was very clever, and he was kind of hot-housed and sent to university early and everything like that. But his mum, who was a sweetheart and a very creative person herself, at one point she told him she wanted him to be the new Shakespeare.
Oh, my word.
So, there was a certain amount of, I think, for both of them, as they grew up too, they had sort of picked up on this sense of, well, I've got to be really good at this, and I've got to put pressure on myself to be outstanding, or I can't really call myself a creative. And if I can't really be outstanding, then I don't know if I'll bother to
Yeah.
try. And I think without very much being conscious of it for myself, as a teenager, I think I slightly took that on a little bit from them, but mostly just from, from school, from the culture that we live in,
Cultural stuff. Yeah.
which is that you've got to be validated, by other people for what you're doing. You can't just create for the sake of it, which of course now I totally disagree with.
Yes. And I totally disagree with it too. And I find it hard to live that, because there's so, especially like as a recovering perfectionist, and we talk about perfection a lot here because that's one of the things that really is decimating in motherhood. That idea that as soon as you start something, you should be excellent at it. And that there's no learning process. There's no, like, going from A to B could be a really messy, like, jiggly line, and you may be significantly better when you get to B. But if you're a perfectionist, as soon as you start at A, the feeling is, I've got to be excellent right now, and if I don't, then I'm going to ditch it. And that's really perpetuated a lot, because that idea of, like, you're not good at art, like if you had some drawing classes and some art class, like some painting classes, not you particularly, but one may get a lot better. But often we don't even allow ourselves the classes unless we think we're, like, I don't know, already an excellent painter or something. And it's so damaging. But there's so much, even like in the way that social media operates with likes and um, like, I notice my mood is impacted if I think a post has really done badly. I think, oh, I'm not going to bother to post anymore because no one likes what I'm posting. Do you know what I mean? And it's so ridiculous. I mean, I'm a therapist. I know, like, all the stuff, but I mean, it's not ridiculous because it's hooks into some of my own stuff, but it's so hard to defend against this.
It is like an invisible trap that I think as a society we kind of all live within, and we teach our children unthinkingly to view themselves and their expressions into the world in a similar way.
Yeah.
Until we start questioning it. Because if you look at if I think of my daughters when they were really young, there is none of that self-consciousness. There's just a curiosity, a kind of willingness to just see what happens with things, play, try things, make things. And then it comes to a certain point in all of us where we start to become maybe a bit more self-conscious, or we see our work in comparison to someone else's painting or whatever, and we start to feel like, oh, maybe she's better than me, or I'm not so good at this. And I feel it's such a shame that school, at the moment at least, most schools seem to really follow that and make learning very divisive. Things like, for example, it drives me crazy that we have things at our school like Star of the Week, where each week a child is kind of celebrated in front of the whole school for something they've achieved. And I can see the appeal. I can see that the positive element of that is that, we're celebrating a child and what they're doing. Yeah, I get that. But I also think the reality is that some children might feel more confident to show themselves in that way, or to actually maybe create the kind of work that teachers really applaud. And some children might find it harder to finish their work on time, or to write in the way they're supposed to, or to behave in the way they're supposed to. And so what happens is you get this divisions always, between, there's the one person at the front standing there who might be feeling really good about being celebrated, or might be feeling quite embarrassed about it.
Yeah.
And then there's all the other children sitting there watching, who are now feeling like, well, I wasn't as good, was I? I'm not as good as that. I didn't get it this week. And maybe I haven't had it for a long time. Start of the week. And it feels like it really is an example of this very strange, competitive, kind of divisive way of valuing people's output into the world, and how people learn. When, as you say, actually, with something like creativity or any kind of learning, it is the process itself that's slow, that's organic, that can't really be measured, that is far more important and powerful than achieving a certain result at the end.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that what you just said about, there's all different types of children and different ways in which they express, and different ways in which they thrive, actually. And our whole system is geared only to, I guess, to dandelions, that categorization of children between orchids and dandelions. And there's actually many children who are not dandelions, and it's really hard to function within that. And it's hard. It's so interesting because I really thrived at school and did very well. That was a big safety thing for me around doing well and getting top marks and everything. But my story about myself is that my art is not as good as my sister's. And I loved art as a child. But then at the senior school that I was at, I didn't get chosen to do art.
Wow.
And so my kind of expression of creativity in that arena of drawing or painting or coloring, or I love drawing with oil pastels, I don't do, because I don't know if I'm good enough, that kind of thing. And I think that also in the educational system, we tend to value science and maths and geography and history, and those things like art and dance and literature. We don't value so much. And I love what's his name, Ken Robinson's work, which he says we're trying to train all children to be professors, and really we should value the creative arts so much more highly.
Yeah, because creativity, I think, is an innate part of every human being.
Yeah.
If we break it down, if we're not talking about creating some fabulous work of art or an amazing performance or whatever it is that's sort of showy and polished, the actual sort of act of creating and the urge to create is really a part of a human being just kind of trying to understand the world and trying to express themselves in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. In ways that make sense to them. Yeah, exactly. And tell us about, so you said that you were kind of celebrated and allowed in your family to be creative. And how did that creativity, because I actually think therapy is very creative in a way, in terms of what we integrate into our own model and how we work with our clients. It's a very creative role. How have you gone back to art and to painting and things like that? And tell us about how you kind of gathered yourself together, because you've got a beautiful poetry book. And I think you're either writing or have written a children's book. Tell us about your kind of journey around that and how that went.
Wow, yes. It has been a journey of many different paths, and there continue to be many different paths, rather than one obvious path that I'm going down. I think that I continued to some degree to be creative in later adolescence, in drama. I used to love acting, singing, so many ways in which I have really just been sustained by my creativity. And then I went to university and studied drama. Then after
Wonderful.
that, went and lived in Paris on my own for a bit. And I think that was a bit of a turning point for me, because I recognized that there was a kind of feeling in Paris that anyone was allowed to do anything creatively. And I know you mentioned perhaps before the interview, but you were saying that you wondered if it's a British thing to be quite strict in parameters of sort of expectations of how we can be creative and who's allowed to be creative. And I think without realizing it, that that had been affecting me in this country. And so living on my own abroad in a place and working and spending quite a lot of time at a bookshop called Shakespeare and Company, where there were lots of would-be writers and writers, allowed me to really take that message in, that I could just try it. And that it was actually okay and exciting to be passionate about creativity. But that was something that I didn't need to be ashamed of, that I could just enjoy playing, really, with my writing, with drawing, with singing, with acting, whatever it was. And I wanted to do all of them, and I still do. I still want
Wonderful.
it all. I mean, and even the baking, which actually came about as a result of being told that I was too thin to get IVF initially to
Really?
try and create my babies. Yeah. I
They
was
told you? Wow, I didn't know that was a
I'm
thing.
very tall and I'm slim, and my BMI was not correct. It never has been correct, although I'm very healthy and I love food. So I ended up starting to bake and then created a baking blog because I
That's
needed
so beautiful. Because the things that you bake, everyone must go and have a look at your Instagram, and all those details will be in the show notes. But the tarts you bake, and like the way you integrate like flowers and pansies into your baking, and beautiful things that often like very seasonal, most beautiful, beautiful things. So you really went for such beauty. You didn't just kind of start like frying up lots of chips or
Well, I did also have lots of chips. And I loved it, and ice cream, and I had to have it was a strange old time, lots of pies and complan between meals. I mean, the irony was I had I think I know I'm moving around chronologically a bit here, but
Not at all.
while trying to conceive, I had got myself healthier than ever before. I was doing lots of yoga and loving it. I'd probably cut down on sugar. I can't remember. So I was at my kind of fittest,
Yeah.
in order to conceive. And then I was told by the doctors, no, you've got to put on weight somehow, or you can't get free IVF. I mean, actually, in the end, the free IVF didn't work, and I had to go and get it privately. But I think they would have probably said the same thing to me then anyway. So the idea was, try and somehow bulk yourself up a bit in order to be able to have this treatment. And so it became, again, I wanted it to be a joyous thing, something I could really take pleasure in, feeding myself in beautiful, creative ways, rather than feeling like I'd done something wrong and I had to kind of pay penance now. And I think I'm very lucky that I've always had an interesting but healthy attitude towards food, which means that it didn't trigger anything in me that would have been perhaps a bit distressing for someone who was very careful with what they ate.
Well, yeah, you didn't have an eating disorder history that made it more complicated and difficult.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so beautiful. I didn't know that was why you started. I didn't know that was why you were such an amazing baker. I love that.
Well, I wasn't. I had never really baked before since childhood until about whenever it was, 14 years ago. That's when I just started. And also, in a way, that was useful too, because it was another lesson. I recognized, oh, wow, I can learn to bake a cake. I can follow a recipe and I can learn to do this creative thing, which then has a delicious outcome.
Yes.
And once I recognized and learned how to bake a simple cake or a simple pie, I then realized, oh, I can do my own versions of this. I can kind of become experimental with this, and I can make it beautiful, and I can change this or that. And that was another reminder to myself that actually I had this innate creativity inside me, and that I could really try and do whatever I wanted.
Yes. Yes,
And
exactly.
then having children kind of compounded that in a way, I think, because motherhood is innately creative. I mean, I think it is the most, well, I don't want to qualify it. I think there are lots of different ways to be creative, but it's certainly a very rich, creative process, just actually conceiving babies, giving birth to babies, and then the act of raising them, particularly in the early years, is so intensive and creative. You're creating these human beings from scratch.
Yeah, you really
And
are.
it made me recognize that actually, if I can do that, if I can be a mother and find ways to help my babies grow and to help me grow within this process, then I can also create whatever else I want to.
That's so powerful. And I think what you said about, because often going back to that perfectionist thing, like about whether you can cook or bake, I sometimes have this thing in my head that I'm only a good cook if I've created something from scratch, like that I haven't used a recipe, or that it's been my own imagination that's come up with this recipe. Which is absolute rubbish. It's absolute rubbish. In order to learn, like what you said about, you have to first learn to make the cake, and then you can kind of augment it or, you know, experiment. And it's the same with so many things about allowing ourselves to go to classes. We're allowed to just decide we love life drawing and go to a class and be not able to actually do it, but have the class teach us, or the teacher teach us. There's not enough, I don't know, I just keep on coming back to that allowing and permission. Tell us about, so you have this overall view of motherhood as a very creative endeavor. Yes, it absolutely is. I've never really looked at as the whole of motherhood like that. I look at it as like I guess I treat it a bit like a research project. But it is creative inherently in the way I approach it, but I've never framed it as creativity. How, writing poetry. Had you always written poetry? How did you sort of segue into that?
I had written poetry since the Paris year. So since about sort of 21, I was very inspired there and I started writing there. And then I came home and I carried on writing, and I was very lucky to come runner-up in a poetry competition and to have the experience of having a poem published in an anthology, which felt like there was that, therefore, that external validation, that kind of encouragement to continue. But I must say, I didn't do that much. I didn't write that much. I longed to write, but it was a combination of having quite challenging jobs and then training to be a therapist from the ages of 25 to 30. That meant that I didn't get that much time to really write. And I think now, looking back, it was partly fear. I was coming up against, I still had this sort of internalized assumption that I had to be really good at something, that I wasn't good enough at writing, say, or at art or singing, whatever, in order to really bother pursuing it. What was the point? I wasn't going to be the best at it. What was the point? And I felt like I didn't feel strong enough I didn't feel I would be strong enough to kind of endure criticism or rejection of any of my creations. And I do remember that really strongly. And I think a lot of us have that, again, quite unconsciously, potentially. We're not aware that that might be what's putting us off, even just trying to do something which we know we enjoy.
I have that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And so then how did you kind of, what made you go to, because you've shared some very lovely wisdom various times on Instagram about how you talk back to your inner critic, how you support yourself, how you kind of move forward. How do you kind of do that?
Well, that's quite a tricky one to answer, but I will try. I think firstly, there's that sense of fuck it, I'm going to try it, which really came in me when I had the babies. It really did. Obviously, I was far too exhausted to do anything creative in the early months of babyhood. But as I was saying earlier, there was this sense of, wow, I'm surviving this. I'm raising these little beings. We seem all quite kind of happy. There's a feeling of we can do this. And if I can do this, then I really can. When I've got the time, when I'm not so shattered, I might actually just try and do some other things too and see what happens. And
yes. I love that energy. I want to say, fuck it.
Yeah, fuck it, and maybe too something about, well, what have I got to lose really? Because, and perhaps that's a big difference between, say, Flora at 22 and Flora at, how old was I when I really started to write again properly? 40, 42, something like that. Because I already had, at 42, I've had my practice now for nearly 20 years, my therapy practice, and I love it. And like you, I feel that therapy is inherently creative and wonderfully spontaneous, and you never know where you're going to go with a client, and there's this sense of creating something together, which I really relish. And therefore, I think I could approach the idea of writing a bit more or drawing, whatever it was, with a sense of, well, I've not got to make this my job. I've not got to make money out of this. I can just try it and see what it's like and see what feelings it gives me. And that's what's really valuable here. Whether or not anyone ever sees it or responds to it is not at all relevant. I'm just going to do this for me, and see how it grows as a result. And I think that the very intense experience of parenting twins lent itself to a lot of kind of cathartic writing and
Yes.
exploration of my feelings around what it was like to be a mother, and some of the real sort of tensions inherent in that role of being so caring, but also needing to have a self, and not fall into a sort of codependency. So I think that actually by choosing to start writing about my experiences, which is what I ended up doing for my poetry book, I'm a Spider Mother, it allowed me to take the space and the kind of mental focus on actually what is this I'm experiencing? What do I find difficult? What do I really enjoy? So there's a catharsis, there's a self-expression, and there was also a sense of writing something or making something and then being able to think, even if there's one little bit of it that I liked, like, oh yeah, I did that. Feels good.
Yeah. Yeah. That really, because I can really hear how loving you are towards yourself, and that kind of wonder and delight in your own self and what you've produced, regardless of what anyone else may say. And that unhooking bit, I personally have found that unhooking from the external validation, I'm still in an ongoing journey around that. I found that incredibly hard. I think because so much safety for me in childhood rested in that validation.
Yeah.
And then there's a sort of sense, well, if someone hasn't approved of it, have I even done it? There's something about that. Like, does it even exist if someone else doesn't think it's good? And I've really had to kind of grapple with that, just generally. And Flora, then how did you, because I want to kind of help the listeners really inhabit their own creativity and allow themselves that. It sounds like you had your Parisian year and what you observed there, and the being outside the sort of strictures of British culture really helped you kind of embrace that, like that you were allowed. And then how did you kind of because going to get a publisher and all of those things, those you really have to kind of be able to withstand a lot.
You do. It feels, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? That a lot of people find really scary, and I did too, and still do. That move from creating something, like putting something down on paper, to then trying to see if other people are interested or trying to get it published. Instagram was really useful for me in that way, because I, although I was not and chose not to kind of publish a lot of poetry on Instagram, I nevertheless sort of started to occasionally post a little bit, and I saw that there were other people there who were using it a lot to just kind of start to showcase their work. And more than anything, it was a chance to develop a community, really, of like-minded writers, and made some great contacts with some lovely mums who were writing poetry. And one of them was setting up what she called the Mum Poet Club, which you can find on Instagram now, which is a really welcoming place, and has over periods of time published anthologies written by anyone basically who wants to submit a poem to a particular theme, and they were particularly interested in publishing poetry about motherhood. So when I did feel like I was finally ready to take it seriously, I approached them about publishing my book, which is what happened. But thinking of what you were saying about trying to kind of break it down for people listening, in terms of how to encourage and sit with your own creativity, I feel like I continued to tune into that voice, which I think, thanks to my supportive early family experiences, has always been in me, but I've definitely needed to kind of build on that voice of encouragement, that almost like kind of building an internal coach
Yeah.
for myself to counteract the voice that we all also have, which is the sort of inner critic voice. And so that was there. My coach was there for me when I was trying to conceive. My coach has been there for me when I'm struggling through parenting. The critic is still there too. Don't get me wrong. It's not. I'm certainly still able to berate myself and criticize myself, whether it's about parenting or creativity. But just to very consciously try to ask myself, well, what would you say if you were trying to either talk to a friend and she was saying, oh, that was terrible, I just wrote that and I'm so embarrassed by it now, I mustn't let anyone see that. What would you actually say to this friend? Because you wouldn't say, yeah, don't bother, you're awful. There's nothing of any worth in anything that you could ever show anyone, which is kind of what our critic says, isn't it?
Yes.
And
Exactly.
every time I kind of go to, well, what would I say if I was talking to a friend? That's like building up an inner coach. The coach is saying, well, what would I say if I was talking to a friend? I'd say, oh, well done for doing it. You've tried, and there might be a bit. If you give it a day, come back to it, see if there's anything that actually you do like in it, or it might be different then, or I really liked this bit, or
Yeah.
just going, all those kind of, we're so good at giving those kind of messages to each other and to our
Exactly.
children too, and I think a lot of us are very kind of consciously parenting in such a way that we're really trying to give encouraging messages to our children, and to have moved away from this kind of, oh, you're good at art, which
Yes,
actually
exactly.
make a child feel really anxious, to more of a, oh, you worked really hard on the face. I can see, I love the lines of the nose and the eyes, or, or you spent ages on that, to kind of try and really kind of say, yeah, I can see that effort. I can see that growth in you. So
Exactly.
it's a very conscious decision in me to say these things to myself as often as I can.
Um, I made a reel for Instagram. I actually don't know if I've shared it, but I've used this concept before about when our children are learning to walk. You never say to your child, "Oh my word, you're such a shit walker. You should give up on that. Like, you're not going to get anywhere. Stop it. You keep on falling over and you've banged your head or something." But we say that sort of thing to ourselves all the time. Like, either you're a shit mum, or you've got a shit painting, or I don't like that piece of writing you've done. And if we applied the way that we talk to our children when they are learning to walk, specifically because there is such a process of that. There's pulling up on the sofa or pulling up on a furniture, and then there's like the toddling and the hand holding and things. And we are so endlessly encouraging and loving and mirroring that effort back, and like showing our wonder in how they are and our delight in what they're doing. And we just do not do that for ourselves. And actually, I'm going to try and do that for myself a bit more, listening to you.
Well, that's what we need to do. We need to do that for ourselves, whether it's that we're trying to write something, or, we're going to a job interview, or we're going into a shop for the first time in months because we've been phobic of shopping in large spaces, or whatever it is. I feel like this is an attitude that kind of across the board is so helpful to try to consciously encourage in ourselves. And we know we can do it because, as you say, we do it to those we love. We give them that. But there needs to be a redirection to include ourselves in that love and in that acceptance and that patience.
And Flora, I'm just conscious of the time. Would you like to read us one of your poems from the book, or you don't really want to share that?
I'd be happy to, yeah. Let me just find
What's your
one.
favorite poem from
Oh,
I'm a Spider Mother?
gosh, I can't say. I really couldn't say, actually, because it's quite interesting to be holding this book again, because it's been a few years since it came out now, and it feels a bit like a baby that's kind of growing up and that I've slightly stepped back from. So it's lovely to be in touch with it again. Why don't I read? Well, what were the ones you were saying that you liked the most, Cath?
So I loved The Prophecy, and I also loved I think I'm a Spider Mother, and also Velvet Mother.
Okay. Well, how about it's 4 a.m.? That's the one about being a spider mother. I think we'll have that one. Okay. It's 4 a.m. I hold a newly made baby like a grenade in my arms. Another lies in her cot, crying for me. Bubbles of tears coat her face. She is a part of me I crave to reach. Yet I am with her sister now, who feeds in great gasps, accustoms herself sleepily to a milk that is not mine. The baby is in her cot, turning pink, fluorescent in her loneliness. I send out my voice to hold her. My words are fingers. They trace around her need. Let it exist. I'm here. Her feelings are furballs stuck in her throat. It's okay. Cravings dance in her downy cheeks. Mummy's coming. One big retch, and the suffering is out, vomited into the room. I carefully place the fed baby down, scuttle over to attach myself to her twin. My limbs have grown long and strong. I am a spider mother.
Oh, so beautiful. It's so beautiful because I love the way you in the way you wrote it, how you so clearly talking about attachment, your voice and how your voice reaches out to her. And it's just so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
And it also, we didn't actually go into detail about this, but the feeding, trying to figure out how to feed twin babies when they're so tiny, and ours were also premature. And so there was no ways they could sit up in anything, so their necks are sort of doing this. And unless you have two people, it's such a conundrum, so I really identify with that. So all the details about how to work with you will be in the show notes, but tell us a bit about your practice. And I know you also work as a creativity coach. Tell us about that and how people can connect with you and work with you.
Well, I'm an existential psychotherapist, which basically means that I am a therapist who's interested in helping people to recognize the true sense of who they are, in the sense that to really recognize that they may have certain limitations in their expectations of themselves or their views of themselves and the world, and how to kind of work through those limiting beliefs about themselves and how to try to find more of an authentic self, how to really kind of live more truly according to their values and their sense of who they are and who they could be. So I really love my work, and I have a practice which is online. And I also, as you say, work as a creativity coach, although, to be honest, elements and discussion of creativity can very much come up in work with my therapy clients too. But yeah, if anyone wants to kind of specialize in really energizing their creativity or working through some of those limiting beliefs that might be blocking them from their creativity, then that's something that I always really enjoy helping people with also. And I'm also, that's a continual practice for me too. So I'm in the process of writing children's picture book stories, which I'm loving. And I will probably continue to do some more poetry when I feel ready at some point. But I just, I'm really, really enjoy helping people to kind of explore themselves and to develop that kind and compassionate inner coach for themselves, to really encourage them on to fulfill more of their potential. Just as I feel like I am in a continual dialogue with myself to do that.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. And I think that it's so, from a nervous system point of view, I want to say that for everyone listening, that creativity is one of the ways that we can complete stress cycles. And so if you're someone who can only do something if you think it's got some sort of like other value, I want to tell you that creativity has a big value from a nervous system point of view, that to kind of reduce stress. And so, yeah, I love that. I love what you just said, Flora, about like really coming into ourselves and allowing ourselves to be like as full as we are. And before we end, is there anything else you want to say?
It may be useful to say that part of being creative is actually just allowing yourself to make mistakes and to see what happens. And that this process of creativity, therefore, as you were mentioning, becomes really just a way of being with yourself, which is inherently kind and playful, and one that, if we allow in ourselves, can really impact our children too, and can impact their sense of how much they can enjoy their creativity or what meaning they give to it. And there's something really beautiful about, I think, children recognizing that their parent is enjoying doing something just for the pleasure of it, that models to our children that actually they can really find this way of life for themselves also, and that it is a practice that is with us throughout our lives, and for our mental health, is incredibly grounding and fulfilling practice, just to have that attitude towards creating and towards learning as well.
Yes. Yeah, that's absolutely beautiful. And I always think to myself, I have to hold it like with my palm open, because otherwise I apply too much like I need external validation energy and I crush it like that, you know what I mean? Because I'm trying so hard to get what I think I need out of it. So I'm going to kind of open my palm metaphorically all the time. So thank you. This has been really wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much, Cath. I've really enjoyed it.
Me too.